Hi and welcome! It's been a while since I made the last asset spotlight video, and in the meantime, quite a few new additions have made it to the list of assets I enjoy working with a lot. This one will showcase some useful assets with a focus on environments, a bit of UI, and some general editor tools you might not yet have on your radar. And what you see on screen right now is a result of what I'm going to be talking about. The pinned link in the comment leads to a list with all the assets mentioned in this video, plus a Reddit post with even more entries and examples. If you watch this around the time of its release, you'll find most of the entries here are on sale during the 2026 spring sale. There are over 300 assets at 50% off, plus the daily flash deals you might already know from previous sales. This video has also been sponsored by the Unity Asset Store. Thank you for that. They are not buying my opinions, however, and I only spotlight assets I actually enjoy working with. Also, as far as I am aware of, none of these assets use AI. However, I can only check for this with the help of the notice on the store and my own gut feeling. Let's start with what you've already been seeing me do on screen for a moment. You might have watched my video on creating environments a while ago, and a while before its release, I started testing some other terrain creation assets and settled on working with Microverse. It's a non-destructive way of creating terrains, and after the initial bit of a learning hump, is something I have a lot of fun with. Mind you, I'm still learning, this is a mighty tool. But it is also generally very well put together, and intuitive enough to get started with it, with lots of depth later on. The way this works is that you start with a Unity terrain, then add height maps to it from the Microverse window. The ones you see here are all created by Roland from the Ultimate Stamped collection, who has a staggering amount of them available in individual packs or just the one big pack with everything in it. If you enjoy creating terrains, the big pack is absolutely worth it, and they work no matter if you're working with the default terrain, Microverse or Gaia. As you can see, you can mix different terrain stems, leading to very custom maps, and I lost count of how much time I already put into this part alone to get a feel of how things work while enjoying my results. It doesn't end with the stamps, of course. You can create presets for textures, vegetation, objects, and much more, then add them to your terrain via drag and drop. If you'd rather have somebody else do the heavy lifting for you, I recommend Roland's Biomes presets. Those are the ones you see on screen here, and while they work great out of the box, they are also seriously good learning materials to create your own presets. He's created presets for most of all the best known environment assets, like the one from BK or 6 Games, which I enjoy working with a lot. Case in point, the main set I'm working with for this video is BK's Pure Nature 2 Asian Valley pack, with added cherry and maple trees as well as buildings from the Sinti Samurai Empire pack. BK and 6 Games recently released 2 more packs on this theme, which look absolutely gorgeous, and I'll have to give them a try at some point. Maybe in a future video? Whenever you work with terrains, don't forget to add the point of reference to your scene, and I highly recommend doing that as early as possible, because here's a lesson. My character comes from Polysplit Games' Low Poly Medieval Fantasy Characters pack, this time the Heroes one, because I already spotlighted the NPC one in a previous video. The characters are just the right kind of stylized and detailed for my taste, and I like them a lot. And yeah, I think you can see the problem. Well, at least I hope you see why you should add a point of reference. The terrain I created is way too big. I'd still be sitting here detailing it in 2 weeks, and that doesn't fit into the production timeline of this video. So let me do all that detailing once more, just with a much smaller terrain this time. Always remember, the second time you do a thing, it'll always go much quicker. Get the initial grumpiness out of the way quickly, and it will be more enjoyable too, because you already know what you're doing. And hey, you can always grow your terrain. You don't have to start out with a map that feels like the size of a small country. Okay, yeah, this is more manageable. I can work with that. This time around, I'll also add some details. Microverse and Roland's presets are ideal if you need to quickly fill the terrain with vegetation, but adding a few details by hand will make it look a bit more intentionally designed, at least in my opinion. I showed the tool before in my last asset spotlight video, but for manual placement and painting objects onto a terrain, Scatter by Distant Land is a favorite of mine. as is their cozy 3 weather and sky system, but that already got a big spotlight in the same video mentioned here, so if you're interested in that, maybe go and watch that one next. I'm just adding it here because it has become my default system for this, and I like the lighting and effects it comes with a lot. After adding a few more objects and animals, the world already looks alright at this point, but some tools make adding the remaining flourishes a lot easier. For example, I want to add a few fields to the side of the road. While, yes, I could just stamp that into existence, I'll go with Spline Spawner by Staggered Creation this time. It makes it easy to define areas to spawn objects in, or splines to spawn objects along of. And while I enjoy working with the built-in spline tool a lot, this just feels a lot more powerful and enjoyable to work with. I can go with just some wild placement, ordered grids, or along splines, which should catch all typical use cases in my opinion. Especially when working with terrains or generally uneven grounds, the modifier to snap to colliders comes in ultra handy. Other modifiers let you offset the spawned elements, or rotate them around any given axis among others. If you're working with environments, you really need to give this one a look. If you don't like the harsh edges of elements sitting on your terrain, Cronect's Edge Fusion might be worth a click for you. It is a post-processing feature that blends edges together, which works particularly well for stones and cliffs, as I hope you can see here. You'll have to play around with the settings a bit, maybe add some layers to exclude from this effect, or some objects might look partially melted into your terrain, but that's something you'll learn in a matter of minutes. If you've seen my previous environment-focused walkthrough, you'll have heard me mention that I try to find some points of interest in a larger environment to focus on. For this scene, for example, it's the fields, the tiny group of houses at water's edge, the maple grove in the center, and the house around the bend at the edge of the map. This might still be very manageable in a small scene like this, but with larger ones it can become a bit of a chore to constantly drag and pan from one place to the next. Warped Imagination's Scene View bookmark tool comes in handy here, and makes it easy to add bookmarks to a scene to quickly switch between. It is part of the overlay system of your scene, which supposedly opens with a press of the apostrophe on your keyboard, but for me that did not work. If you are in the same boat, you can access it via the 3-dot menu in the top right corner and picking it from there. The visuals are about done at this point, so let's have a look at some useful audio tools. And if you enjoyed this so far, please consider giving this video a like and maybe subscribe. The first one is SoundShape's dynamic audio areas. Have a guess at what it supports you to do. Typical static or slowly moving audio sources are useful, no questions there, but for things like a whole river, they aren't exactly what I need. This asset lets me create zones for audio effects, which makes the world feel a bit more immersive. You can simply draw the zone and the corresponding audio source will move along or inside of that curve. The red lines show where the effect starts to become noticeable, but you'll have to click on the audio source you set up to see those. And I also want to highlight that this asset has one of the best introductory videos I've seen on the Asset Store in quite a while. The sounds I'm adding come from the Environment Sounds pack by Placeholder Inc. They might not particularly fit the Asian theme I'm going for, but they found their place in lots of other settings before. For the next example, I want to add footstep sounds to my NPC while walking. That requires to add animation events to the walking animation, like this. My preview looks a bit different because I'm using Ultimate Preview by Voxel Labs, which makes it a whole lot more useful than the built-in default preview window. It also finally makes the preview window useful when working on UI elements, which you'll see once I switch to that topic. To play sounds, I'm using Master Audio 2024 by Dark Tonic Inc., which is the current version of the asset, even though the date might suggest otherwise. I've thrown that into every project for about the last half year and don't want to go without it anymore. It's a sound manager, which makes setting and customizing sounds and sound groups an absolute breeze. For the footstep sounds, for example, I'll drop one into it to create a so-called sound group and rename it to footsteps to make finding it easier at a later point. In the sound group settings, I can make a whole lot of changes. The most important ones being the amount of voices the sound can have, that is the maximum amount of sounds that will play at one time. Since there are not terribly many NPCs in any given area, I'll start with about half a dozen and tweak as necessary at a later point. Then pitches can be customized for each entry of the group too, with some useful buttons to test what those might now sound like. You can also customize how probable it is for a sound to play, which I'm still experimenting with. And lots of other settings I'm sure will come in handy at some point. Their support was super helpful and friendly when I ran into a tiny edge case at some point, and the documentation is solid. To play the sounds and tie it together with my footsteps, I prepared a script I attached to my NPCs and defined the sound group at the top. The animation event calls the method every time a foot hits the ground, which will notify Master Audio to play a random entry of the sound group. To turn this scene into a more than just a walking simulator, let's have a look at a few editor tools that will help with that. First, I want to add some items for my player to find. That typically means two things: having some items with icons in the first place and a way to display them on screen. I'll just quickly create a scriptable object for these items, which will hold a name and a sprite to display. On the UI side, I really only need a box right now that will display the contents of whatever the player interacts with. For a few months, I've worked with Flexible Image by Jeff Draw to quickly generate shapes for my UI. It is a super powerful asset, but still surprisingly easy to work with. I've used this one extensively in my recent collapsible sidebar video, so I won't go into detail here. But if you typically enjoy creating UI with predominantly geometric shapes, this is absolutely worth a click. If you are looking for effects to add to your UI, like blurs, glows, or drop shadows, Chocolate Dinosaur's UI-FX pack will be something you will enjoy. You can either get specific effects in their own package, or get the big one with some added effects on top. I've worked with quite a few effect assets over the last years, and none came close to the quality of Chocolate Dinosaurs in my opinion. The movement, however, comes from a tweening script I created a tutorial on a while ago. One attached script later, the stash inventory pops up when my player interacts with it. Making interactables stand out could be useful, however, so I'll add Connect's Highlights Plus 2 component to the things I want my player to be aware of. It is super powerful and surprisingly simple to work with. One of these asset spotlight videos I'm sure I'll manage to not have at least 2 Connect ones in it, I'm sure, but this is not it. When it comes to icons for my items, I use Poneti's 6000 fantasy icons, and yes, I was highly skeptical of these being AI too. That's just a staggering amount of icons. However, there is no AI notice being given. The artist states they haven't used AI. They have previous versions of these assets with less contents in them released over the years, and I just don't get the gut feeling I have a lot of these days of something looking AI generated. There is a bit of wonkiness in the art, which sounds like I'm saying something bad about it, but quite the contrary. I like seeing imperfections and elements that look like somebody made a conscious decision of depicting elements in a certain way, where I just know AI would have glossed that over and made it look all plasticky, polished, wannabe quadruple A. This feels like a genuine pack to me, with great amount of elements that were created over many years, perfect for prototyping or even throwing into a finished game. I also quite like using these in my D&D campaign, by the way. On the note of sprites, the thumbnails you see here are created with Ultimate Thumbnail by Voxel Lab. The preview window to the right is Ultimate Preview and comes from the same developer. I honestly hadn't given my thumbnails much of a thought for a long time, and my preview window minimized basically since I started working with Unity, because neither built-in version gives anything you could consider helpful. especially when working on UI elements in particular, which is essentially the thing I do the most. These two assets, however, bring some much needed functionality and just flat out improved quality to these areas. Even UI prefabs get good thumbnails now, which is amazing. At this point, I'll have to implement the items to be available for looting, and that's where I really enjoy working with RNG Needs by Starface Labs, which is not just super easy to use, but also is among the editor assets that look straight up the most enjoyable. It's always great to see when a developer uses colors in a non-glaring or oversaturated way. It lets me quickly define loot tables, and I'm sure a lot more, it's just that I use it for this the most, or general weighted distribution tables with a super intuitive interface. Back in my stash code, I reference it like this, and now whenever I open a stash, I get a random item based on its probability, which is easy enough to tweak if necessary. The last 3 assets on my list are focusing on making testing and tweaking simpler. The first is Wingman by Kyle Rhodes, which comes in handy once your list of attached components on any given objects starts getting too long to handle. While the point can be made that dividing that up across objects might be a good idea, it's not always strictly needed. Wingman gives you a list of components attached to the currently selected object and lets you navigate to any of the entries, hiding the rest from view. Small quality of life asset you'll be happy to have in your project when things get complicated. The second one is Draw XXL by Symphony Games, which, when it came out, required me to think of ways to use it. Their promotional video is full of amazingly useful looking visualization helpers, but in all honesty, I don't use most of the features in this pack. However, even just the basics are very nice to have, for example to visualize patrol paths in a more helpful way than the default straight line gizmo is able to do. And the last one is actually a free one. Play Mode Camera Sync by Cheeky Chops Labs. It syncs the Play Mode camera with any objects you want to track, which makes checking if things really are as you thought they'd be a bit easier. Well, I hope you found something in this lineup that might help you with your own projects. Would love to hear from you which one caught your eye in particular. If you enjoyed this list, please give this video a like and consider subscribing. I typically create tutorials focused on UI with an asset spotlight video like this every few months. Have a great week!